day and welcome to Hanratty on Karate. In my last podcast I chatted a little bit about the difference between sports karate and traditional karate with particular regard to the difference in rules and how these competitions are run and what we're looking for in both of them. In looking for a subject for my next podcast, I went through a bunch of old karate magazines that I have, and I found one going back to 1977. This brought back a lot of memories, and I'm looking through the competition results and some fantastic pictures, and the competition was Crystal Palace, 1977 KUGB Nationals. I entered this competition and I did very well. I got through to the last 16 before I met George Godfrey, who was the current European champion at the time. George is about 6'6", I'm about 5'6" on a good day. He managed to catch me with a great Mawashigiri to the head, round kick to the head, which ended my day. However, it did give me the opportunity to watch and have a look at the really good fighters, the seeded fighters who came in with George on the last 16. Now, I'm going through the magazine here and looking at some of the results, and some of them were really good. John Bolton, for example, a really good fighter and teammate of mine from the Red Triangle, ended up fighting Terry O'Neill in the semis, and Terry went through. Phil Duval fought Frank Brennan, another teammate of mine from the Triangle, and Phil beat him and went through to the semis. Mick Ragg beat Van Johnson and went through, and Stevie Cattle, Stumpy, beat Jimmy Poynton and he went through. So it was Mick Ragg against Steve Cattle and Phil Duval against Terry O'Neill in the semis. So the fighting was fantastic all the way through this. You'd see techniques you wouldn't normally see, particularly from Terry O'Neill, who was a very eclectic fighter. He was Shotokan, but he had an amazing capacity to enjoy all martial arts and look at them from a very objective point of view. So Terry's up against Phil Duval in the semis, and on the first fight, I've just explained the rules and the difference also between the sports karate. We don't go for a first point and an extra match or saishihai. You fight until you get a winner. From each of them is classed as a different fight. So an overtime is a different fight, and you fight until you get a winner. You get the full time. So the fight between Phil Duval and Terry O'Neill was exciting, and it finished, the second overtime finished with Terry throwing an Ushiro Giri and Phil characteristically palm blocked that, double palm that blocked that to his left as it was coming around, and Terry immediately switched it up and hit him right in the head with a wonderful Uramoash. Caught him with the heel right on the forehead. Phil immediately dropped to the floor, lost consciousness for a minute, but he got back up. And there was a little bit of a discussion about it, and the verdict, and I was sitting right next to the ring, so I know what they were saying, is another sensei said he banged his head on the floor when he went down, so it wasn't the kick to the head that knocked him out, and so the point was awarded, and Terry went through to the finals on a nippon against Phil. Stevie Cattle and Mick Ragg, they had a battle, also going to a couple of overtimes. And Stevie eventually went through because Steve had amazingly fast punches, and the guy was just unbelievable the way he cut off the ring, chased you down, didn't give you a chance, and then just absolutely threw himself 100% into every technique he had. So he come up fighting against Terry O'Neill in the finals. So it was Steve Cattle, Terry O'Neill. I gotta say, this was one of the best fights I have ever seen in my whole life. Suffice to say that it went to 3 overtimes or 3 extra fights, and Terry was throwing stuff that you could only read about. Axe kicks to the chest, and Stumpy, being shorter but extremely fast punching, would just charge in as soon as Terry twitched and try to get a punch in. Stumpy or Steve actually did score the first point, but Terry got one back with a spinning back fist. He was just throwing everything. Another point he did was he jumped right up in the air and came down on top of Steve's head with a Tetsuyuchi. Just smacked him round on top of the head, a point for that. after 2 overtimes, they went into the 3rd overtime, and it was looking like a movie. It was looking like a Bruce Lee movie. Well, better than Bruce Lee. These guys could fight. But we started seeing stuff that was unbelievable. The final point came. It was still drawing 1-0 each towards the end of the fight. And then Terry lunged forward with Kizami, or leading jab, went into a forward roll, brought his heel back over and hit Stumpy right in the middle of the chest just before Steve's Gyakuzuki made contact. Now, the time drawn and everybody stopped, and then the referees got a little bit together for a muttering. And I didn't think Steve's punch had scored. Steve obviously did, and so did all the Kirkdale boys. Terry was just standing there saying an awful lot. And then the referees actually came to the conclusion that Terry's heel had hit Stumpy just before he got his Gyakuzuki in. And so it was awarded to Terry, and Terry won the Kumite. Actually, he won Grand Champion this year because he also got the kata with Sochin. So that wasn't the first time that Terry and Steve had faced each other. They've both been winners once before. I think Terry had won this 3 times and Steve had won it once before, as far as I can make out. But it was amazing. So the fact that they had these extensions and that you have to score like it's a new fight, that's a whole different set of rules that they have in the sports karate. And I remember the photographer for this particular karate magazine, and I can't remember what the magazine's called because the cover's gone off this, it's so old. But he got some great pictures, particularly the one of Phil Duval trying to block down for an Ushiro Geri just before Terry had changed it up to an uramoashi, or a hook kick, if you like. Absolutely just knocked him out. He struck with his heel right on the temple, and you can see that in this picture. And this picture's been posted a few times. I sent copies of it in to the KUGB who posted it. It was just an amazing fight, and I don't think you would see that kind of thing these days, not with the amount of contact. Of course, no gloves, no mats, no shin guards, no fancy coloured belts. Everybody knew who was who, and away you went. As I say, that was probably the most exciting fight that day. There was other events, of course, and Terry won the kata with Sochin. Stevie Cattle came second with Gojushi Osho, and I think John Holsworth with Unsu. John was a regular kata competitor and regularly won. In the ladies that year, Sandy Hopkins, who was Steve's other half, won with Unsu, and Shelley McLaughlin got in second with Jin. Funny enough, I met Shelley many, many years later in St. Lucia. I was on holiday, and I was having a little bit of a set to. President Trump had just been voted in the States, and I had an American sitting at the table next to me, and he had the cheek to ask me what I thought of their great new president. And as I answered him, I heard this voice behind me say, "Is your name John?" I turned around, and there was this lady with her friend at the next table, and I couldn't think of who she was because I've got a terrible memory for faces. But her voice was really familiar, and she goes, "I'm Shelley." And it all came back, and it had to be 30 years since I'd seen Shelley. So after I finished telling this guy what I thought about his wonderful president, we went off and had a drink and just caught up on old times. And Shelley ran, I believe, 6 newsagent stands throughout the city, so she'd done very well. Now, I just want to tell you a little bit of story about Shelley. Shelley was part of the gang that usually went down to Crystal Palace, and she knew a lot of people in the Triangle. She was a member of the Triangle, and her and my old sensei, Frank Vernon, went down to London to see another instructor who wasn't in the KUGB. So when she came back, Andy Sherry, the famous Andy Sherry, or infamous Andy Sherry, he told Sherry she couldn't train at the Triangle anymore. This kind of cheesed her off, because he didn't tell Frank Vernon that, and he'd taken her down there. And they went down to train at the Fullers, if you remember Pauline Fuller. They went to train at the Fullers, who weren't members of the KUGB, but I don't know if Andy had something against them or it was just a little bit of professional jealousy. But he barred Shelley from training at the Triangle. Now, Shelley went round to his house, or his mother's house, and he was living with his mother then in Canterbury Gardens, just off Islington. And she was banging on the door and shouting at him. She was that kind of girl. And he refused to come out and talk to her. So she ended up training at Steve's at the Kirkdale Club. And she was very welcome there. And then as years went on, she left and had a bunch of kids and stuff like that. Usually happens. So anyway, that's Shelley, but she did very well. She was in the kata, she did in probably Jin, because I know that's what she did. Sandy always did unsu, and Terry's kata that he always did was so Jin. So there was some really fantastic competition that year, and I believe the Triangle beat Kirkdale in the final, which was usual final. I can't remember who the team was, but I would say it was probably Terry O'Neill, Frank Brennan, Joe Farley, John Bolton. I don't think I was spare that year, and usually I played spare. Jerry Brown, probably. I can't remember the rest of them. But they were always a good team, and they always give good fights. And the team events at Crystal Palace was something to watch. It was like watching a football derby. The crowd, everybody got right behind the team. The atmosphere was up. The crowd were just in there. Coaches, we were allowed to stand on the side and shout during the match. Not too loud, but you could say, talk to your fighters during the match then. You weren't hidden in a little box and couldn't say anything. Of course, there was no video repeats there. You couldn't do replays and stuff like that, so everything was as you've seen it. But even then, the standard of refereeing, with Sensei Hanratty taking centre stage as referee, but we'd have the likes of Charlie Naylor and Derek Langham and Bob Rhodes, maybe Billy Higgins in the corner. It was really amazing. They didn't miss much. These guys knew what they were looking for, and they knew what the fighters were capable of. So it was always good. And think just about the same thing happens in every competition. If you're good, you're going to get to the top. It's nothing to do with the referees or anybody else. It's all up to you. If you're good enough, you'll get to the top. The cream always rises, as they say. So that was it. Anyway, that was one of the best fights I ever saw. So let me give you a little highlight from my own competition past. Maybe highlights a difference in competition rules that we were discussing earlier. When I first started competition, you weren't allowed to compete in Kumite until you were green belt. And so when I got my green belt, about 72, 73, something like that, I entered the North of England Open. Now, there was no weight divisions, there was no belt divisions. Your name was just thrown in a hat, and whoever you came up against, that was your opponent. My very first fight was against Bob Poynton. Bob Poynton at that time, so it was 72, 73, was European champion. He was also, I think, a Nidan or Sandan, and I was green belt. I know Bob because we trained at the same club. He was a very good friend. We stayed very, very good friends right up until his passing. In fact, we used to chat at least once or twice a month on the phone. Anyway, I came up against Bob, and I remember we were in the Students' Union on Mount Pleasant in Liverpool, where they held the eliminations. I was lucky enough to get a very easy given half point against him. I say easy given because I think the ref just gave it to me because I was somewhere in the vicinity of Bob. Anyway, that's about the last thing I remember. If you ever fought against Bob, you knew he had telescopic legs, and he swept me on my back and promptly stomped me into the floor for a nippon. So this was me being a green belt, him being Sandan on Nidan or Sandan at the time, and my first competition. So hello reality, and get back in line. It's not your place. Just another example of rules differences in traditional karate as opposed to sport. A little bit shorter this week, but hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you again soon.